My wife made a secret bet that I would abandon my family, but I discovered her hidden diary. The old floorboard creaked beneath my feet as I moved the bookshelf in our bedroom. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday. My wife, Claire, had taken our 2 children to her mother's house while I stayed home to repaint the room. I wasn't looking for secrets. I wasn't snooping. I was simply trying to fix a loose plank that had annoyed us for months. When I lifted the board, I noticed a small leather notebook wrapped carefully inside a faded blue scarf. At first, I assumed it was an old journal from before we met. I smiled. Maybe I'd discover funny stories from her college years or dreams she'd forgotten. Instead, the first page froze the blood in my veins. The bet begins today. Below it was a date. The date of our wedding. My heart pounded. I kept reading. Rachel says no man stays loyal forever. She says Ethan will eventually choose freedom over family. I told her I'd prove her wrong, but if I lose, I owe her $50,000. My name. A bet. About me. I laughed nervously. Surely this was some strange joke. Then I turned another page. Month 3. Ethan still spends every evening with the kids. Rachel says he's pretending. Another. Year 1. Rachel insists every husband eventually gets tired of responsibility. Another. I must never tell Ethan about the bet. The room suddenly felt smaller. My wife had hidden this for 8 years. 8 years. I sat on the dusty floor while dozens of questions raced through my mind. Why would anyone make such a bet? Who was Rachel? And why hide it beneath the floorboards? Then I found the entry that truly terrified me. If Ethan ever discovers this diary, everything we've built could fall apart. My hands shook. There were hundreds of pages left. I continued reading. The entries slowly changed. They became darker. Rachel suggested creating more pressure. Stress reveals a man's true character. Pressure. What pressure? Another page answered me. I canceled Ethan's fishing trip without telling him. Rachel says taking away his freedom will speed things up. I remembered that trip. I'd blamed my boss for denying my vacation. My wife had canceled it herself. Every year, another event appeared. Family vacations mysteriously canceled. Friends drifting away. Job opportunities that somehow disappeared. Everything I'd assumed was bad luck suddenly looked planned. My stomach turned. The diary wasn't simply recording a bet. It was documenting an experiment. An experiment on me. Then I reached the latest entry. It had been written only 3 days earlier. Rachel thinks Ethan is close to breaking. If he leaves before our 10th anniversary, I lose nothing and finally admit she was right. Close to breaking. I wasn't planning to leave. But reading these pages made me question everything. Had my marriage been real? Or had I spent 8 years as someone's test subject? I heard a car door slam outside. Claire and the kids were home. Quickly, I slipped the diary back into the scarf. For a moment, I considered putting it back under the floorboard. Instead, I hid it in my toolbox. When Claire walked into the bedroom, she smiled exactly as she always did. "How's the painting going?" I looked into the eyes of the woman I'd trusted more than anyone. For the first time in our marriage. I honestly didn't know who she was. Claire stood in the doorway with our children beside her, smiling as if nothing had changed. "How's the painting going?" she asked. I forced a smile. Almost done. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Every word in the diary echoed in my head. The bet begins today. I must never tell Ethan. Rachel suggested creating more pressure. Our daughter wrapped her arms around my waist. "Dad, Grandma made your favorite apple pie." I hugged her tightly. Whatever was happening between Claire and me, the children were innocent. They deserved peace, not another argument. That evening, I watched Claire more carefully than ever before. She laughed with the kids. She asked about my day. She poured me coffee exactly the way I liked it. To anyone else, we looked like the perfect family. But every smile made me wonder whether it was genuine, or just another part of the experiment. After everyone went to bed, I quietly opened the toolbox and took out the diary. Near the back, one page caught my attention. Rachel Morgan. There was a phone number written beside her name. Rachel, the woman who had started the bet. The next morning, I left for work as usual, but instead of driving to the office, I parked outside a small cafe listed in the diary. At exactly 10 a.m., a woman in her 40s walked inside. A few moments later, Claire arrived. I couldn't hear every word, but I watched through the cafe window. Rachel laughed. Claire didn't. Rachel slid an envelope across the table. Claire pushed it back. The conversation became tense. Rachel leaned forward and said something that made Claire lower her head. After 20 minutes, They stood. Rachel walked away smiling. Claire looked devastated. For the first time since reading the diary, I saw something unexpected. Guilt. Maybe Claire wasn't enjoying this at all. Maybe she had become trapped in something she no longer wanted. That night, after Claire fell asleep, I searched through the remaining pages of the diary. Near the final entries, I found words that completely changed my understanding. I hate this bet now. Another page read, Rachel keeps saying Ethan will fail eventually, but every time he chooses us instead of himself, I feel ashamed for ever agreeing to this. I turned another page, if I confess, Ethan will never forgive me. Then another, Rachel says if I quit, everyone will know I admitted she was right. She threatens to tell Ethan everything herself. My hands froze. This wasn't just a foolish wager anymore. Rachel had leverage over Claire. The final unfinished entry stopped halfway through a sentence. Tomorrow I have to meet Rachel again. I think it's time to end this, even if it destroys my marriage because Ethan deserves. The sentence ended there. No more words. No explanation. I closed the diary. Until now, I had believed Claire was manipulating me for fun. Now I wasn't so sure. She had lied. She had hidden the truth for years. Some of the hardest moments of my life had been engineered because of that terrible bet. But the last pages revealed something else. She regretted it. The real question was no longer whether Claire had betrayed me. She had. The question was why Rachel still seemed determined to keep the bet alive after all these years, and what was inside the envelope she had tried so hard to force into Claire's hands. As I stared at the diary, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's calm voice spoke only one sentence before hanging up. You've found the diary, haven't you? My blood ran cold. It was Rachel. The call lasted less than 10 seconds, but it kept me awake all night. You've found the diary, haven't you? Rachel hadn't sounded surprised. She had sounded certain. The next morning, another message arrived from an unknown number. If you want the truth, meet me at Riverside Park at 6 p.m. Come alone. I stared at the screen for several minutes. It could be a trap. But after everything I'd read, I needed answers. That evening, I told Claire I had to work late. She smiled and wished me luck, completely unaware that I knew about the diary. At exactly 6 o'clock, Rachel was waiting on a bench overlooking the river. She wore a dark coat and held a small folder in her lap. You came, she said. I came for the truth. Rachel sighed. The diary only tells Claire's side of the story. My side, I snapped. She made a bet on whether I'd abandon my own family. Rachel didn't deny it. Yes, it was cruel. I won't pretend otherwise. Then why? Rachel looked out across the water. Because 10 years ago, neither of us believed lasting marriages existed anymore. I folded my arms. So you decided to test mine? She nodded slowly. It began as a stupid argument between friends. We had both seen marriages fall apart. I said every husband leaves eventually. Claire insisted you were different. And $50,000. The wager was meant to force us to stick to our opinions. It was never about the money. I laughed bitterly. Tell that to the man whose vacations mysteriously disappeared. Rachel lowered her eyes. I never expected Claire to take my suggestion seriously. She did. I know. For the first time, Rachel looked genuinely uncomfortable. She opened the folder and slid several papers toward me. They were copies of emails from years earlier. One was from Claire. I can't keep doing this. Ethan doesn't deserve it. Another read. I'm ending the bet. Keep the money if you want. My anger faltered. Claire had tried to stop. So why didn't she? Rachel's face hardened. Because I refused. Why? She hesitated for a long moment. Then she answered. Because by then it wasn't about the bet anymore. I frowned. What does that mean? Rachel took a deep breath. I wanted to prove I was right. My own husband left me for someone else after 15 years. I convinced myself every marriage was doomed. Every time you stayed with your family, it felt like my own failure all over again. I stared at her. So you kept pushing. Yes. You manipulated my wife because you couldn't accept your own past. Tears filled Rachel's eyes. Yes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she handed me one final envelope. This belongs to you. Inside was a bank check. $50,000. The bet is over, she whispered. Claire won years ago. I just refused to admit it. I looked at the check without touching it. I don't want your money. You should take it. It won't give my family those lost years back. Rachel nodded. I know. As I turned to leave, she called after me. There's one thing you still don't know. I stopped. Claire never accepted a single dollar from the wager. Instead, every year she secretly donated money to local family shelters because she hated what the bed had become. My mind raced. Was that true, or was Rachel trying to repair the damage she caused? Before I could ask another question, Rachel said quietly, "Go home, read the last envelope hidden inside the diary. Claire wrote it for you, but she never found the courage to give it to you." I drove home in silence. After everyone had gone to bed, I retrieved the diary one more time. Inside the back cover was a sealed envelope I had somehow missed. Across the front, in Claire's handwriting, were 6 heartbreaking words. "To Ethan, if you ever know." With trembling hands, I broke the seal. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper was worn, as though Claire had opened it many times before sealing it again. The first line hit me harder than anything I'd read in the diary. "If you're reading this, I've already hurt you in the worst possible way." I took a slow breath and kept reading. "Ethan, I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you'll understand how. One terrible decision became years of lies." She admitted that the bet had started as a foolish argument with Rachel just weeks before our wedding. At the time, she believed it would be forgotten within months. She never imagined it would grow into something that would haunt our marriage. "The first time I lied to you was when I canceled your fishing trip. Rachel told me that if you became frustrated enough, your real character would appear. I hated myself the moment I did it. I remembered how disappointed I'd been. I had blamed my manager for refusing my vacation request. I had never suspected Claire." The letter continued, "Every time I created another obstacle, I hoped you would get angry at me, confront me, and force me to confess. Instead, you always found another way to support our family. Every sacrifice you made increased my guilt." A tear landed on the page. "You missed promotions because I intercepted phone calls. You lost weekends with friends because I invented family emergencies. I kept telling myself I would confess tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week, then next year. I closed my eyes. Those missed opportunities had shaped my life. I had accepted them as bad luck, never realizing someone I loved had caused them." Then came the part that changed everything. Rachel stopped caring about the bet long ago. She cared about being right. I became too ashamed to admit how far I had gone. I thought telling you the truth would destroy our family, so I kept lying to protect the life built on those lies. The final paragraphs were almost impossible to read. "You have been a better husband than I deserved and a better father than our children could ever ask for. They love you because of who you are, not because of anything I did. If you choose to leave me after learning the truth, I won't fight you. But please don't leave them. They need their father, even if they no longer have a marriage to believe in." At the bottom of the page was a date. The letter had been written 3 years earlier. She had carried this confession with her for 3 years without giving it to me. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. For nearly an hour, I sat alone in the dark living room. Every memory of our marriage felt uncertain. Had the laughter been real? Had the holidays meant anything? Or had every happy moment been built on deception? Just after midnight, I heard footsteps behind me. Claire stood in the hallway wearing a robe. She looked at the diary on the table, then at the open envelope. The color drained from her face. "You found it," she whispered. I nodded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked the question she had probably feared for years. "Did you read everything?" "Yes." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Was any of our marriage real? Claire broke down crying. Every single day after our wedding was real. My love for you was real. The children, our home, every birthday, every Christmas, all of it was real. The lies were real too, and I'll regret them for the rest of my life. I looked at her for a long time. I don't know how to believe anything anymore. She nodded through her tears. I know. Then she quietly removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table. I won't ask you to forgive me tonight. I won't even ask you to stay married to me. But whatever happens between us, thank you for being the father our children deserve. Without another word, she walked upstairs. I remained alone in the living room, staring at the ring beside the diary. For the first time since discovering the truth, I realized the hardest decision wasn't uncovering the lies. It was deciding whether a marriage built on deception could survive because of years of genuine love that followed. As dawn approached, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Rachel appeared on the screen. "There's one final truth Claire still doesn't know. Meet me tomorrow." She deserves to hear it, even if it costs me everything. I didn't sleep. Claire stayed in the guest room. I remained downstairs, staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. It had always reminded me of the happiest day of my life. Now it felt like a picture of two strangers, one smiling with complete trust, the other carrying a secret. By morning, the children noticed the silence. "Are you and Mom okay?" Our son asked over breakfast. Claire and I exchanged a glance. "We're just tired," I answered gently. "Nothing you need to worry about." It was the first lie I had told them in years. After dropping the kids at school, I drove to the address Rachel had sent. She was waiting in a quiet garden behind an old church. "You came," she said softly. "I almost didn't. I wouldn't blame you." She handed me a thick envelope. "I've carried this for years. Claire has never seen it." Inside were printed emails, bank records, and a handwritten letter. "What is all this?" I asked. Rachel looked down. "Proof that I wasn't the only one responsible." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She pointed to one of the emails. It was dated a month before my wedding. The sender was someone I hadn't thought about in over a decade. My older brother. The message read, "Claire, Ethan has always put everyone else before himself. If you ever doubt him, you're making a mistake. Don't let fear ruin your marriage the way it ruined ours." I stared at the screen. "I never knew he wrote this." "He didn't send it to you," Rachel said. "He sent it to Claire after she told him about the bet." My heart skipped a beat. My brother knew. Rachel nodded. "He begged her to stop before the wedding." Why didn't she listen? Because she believed she could prove everyone wrong without hurting anyone. I closed my eyes. The arrogance of that decision had cost us years of trust. Rachel continued. "A week later, I realized how serious it had become. I tried to cancel the bet." I looked at her sharply. "The diary says the opposite." "It does. Why would Claire write that?" Rachel's voice trembled. "Because I lied to her." She took a deep breath. "I told Claire I had already told several friends about the bet. I convinced her that backing out would make both of us look foolish. The truth is, no one else knew." I felt anger rising again. "So all these years were built on my manipulation." Rachel wiped away a tear. "I wasn't trying to destroy your marriage anymore. I was trying to protect my own pride." The words hung heavily between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me from the beginning. "Did Claire ever actually believe I would abandon my family?" Rachel answered without hesitation. "No." "What? She never believed you would leave?" "Not even once." I stared at her. "Then why continue?" "Because after the first lie, she became terrified that confessing would make you leave." The cruel irony struck me immediately. The secret that was meant to test whether I would leave became the very thing most likely to drive me away. Rachel handed me the last page in the envelope. It was a receipt. Every year for 10 years, Claire had transferred money into a college fund for our children, the exact amount she would have owed if she had lost the bet. "She told me," Rachel whispered, "that if the bet ever ended, the only winners should be your children." I folded the papers carefully. The betrayal was real. The lies were real. But so was Claire's remorse. As I stood to leave, Rachel stopped me one last time. "I've already written a statement admitting everything. If you decide to divorce Claire, I'll testify that the manipulation was mostly mine." I looked at her. "For the first time in 10 years, stop trying to control what happens next." Rachel lowered her head. "You're right." I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. When I walked into the house, Claire was packing a suitcase. She looked up with red, tired eyes. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said quietly. "The children can stay here with you until we figure everything out." I placed Rachel's envelope on the table. "You should read this first." Claire slowly opened it. As she read the emails, her face turned pale. By the final page, she was crying harder than I had ever seen. "I never knew," she whispered. For the first time, we both realized the greatest damage hadn't come from the bet itself. It had come from years of fear, pride, and silence. But whether those wounds could ever heal, neither of us knew. Claire sat at the kitchen table, Rachel's envelope still open in front of her. "I can't believe she lied to me too," she whispered. I didn't answer immediately. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought if I ever discovered a betrayal this deep, I would walk away without looking back. Instead, I felt exhausted, angry, heartbroken, but not certain. Claire looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "I know I don't deserve another chance." "No," I replied quietly. "You don't deserve one." She lowered her head. But our children deserve parents who make honest decisions from this point forward. She nodded slowly. Then let's start with the truth. That afternoon, we met with a family counselor before speaking to the children. The counselor advised us to tell them only what they needed to know, that mom and dad were working through a serious problem, but that neither child was responsible. When the children came home from school, we sat together in the living room. Our daughter looked nervous. "Are you getting divorced?" she asked. Claire reached for her hand. "We don't know yet," she said honestly. "But we both love you very much. Nothing that happens between your father and me will ever change that." Our son looked at me. "You're not leaving us, are you?" The question hit me like a punch. I remembered the words written on the first page of the diary. "The bet begins today." A bet about whether I would abandon my family. I looked directly into my son's eyes. "No." I wrapped an arm around both children. "I will always be your dad. I will always be here for you." The fear on their faces slowly eased. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Claire handed me a small wooden box. "I should have shown you this years ago." Inside were dozens of letters. Every birthday, every anniversary, every Father's Day, letters she had written but never given me. The first one was dated our second wedding anniversary. "I wanted to tell you everything today. I couldn't." Another read. "You got passed over for another promotion because of what I did. I watched you smile anyway. I don't deserve your kindness." Year after year, the pattern repeated. Confessions that were never spoken. Apologies that never reached me. Love mixed with guilt. I finished the last letter just before midnight. Claire sat across from me in silence. "You kept writing these instead of telling me." I was a coward. Yes. She accepted the word without arguing. "I thought every year it would become easier to confess," she said. Instead, it became harder. For the first time since discovering the diary, I believed every word she said. Not because trust had returned. Because the evidence matched her actions. She had been trapped by her own decisions for years. That didn't erase the damage. But it explained it. The next morning, I made a decision. Not about our marriage. About our future. I walked into the living room carrying the diary, the letters, and Rachel's envelope. Claire looked confused. "What are you doing? I don't want these hidden anymore." We drove together to the counselor's office. There, we handed over every document. The diary, the letters, the emails. The counselor placed them in a sealed file. "From today forward," I said, "there will be no more secrets." Claire quietly added, "No more lies." For the first time in years, the truth was no longer hidden beneath floorboards, locked inside envelopes, or buried in diaries. It was finally out in the open. Whether that truth would end our marriage or save it, only time could answer. As we left the office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my older brother. "Rachel called me. I know everything now. There's something about our wedding day that neither you nor Claire ever knew. We need to talk." I stared at the screen in disbelief. After everything that had already come to light, there was still one more secret waiting to be uncovered. My brother Daniel asked me to meet him at the old lake where we had fished as children. When I arrived, he was already sitting on the dock, staring at the water. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry." I frowned. "For what?" "For staying quiet." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope that had yellowed with age. "I've carried this for 10 years. Inside was a handwritten note. The handwriting was Claire's. "Daniel, I don't know if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. Rachel says this bet will prove Ethan's love once and for all. I don't believe her anymore, but I'm too ashamed to call off the wedding." I looked up. "You had this all these years?" Daniel nodded. "She gave it to me the night before your wedding." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought she would confess herself." He sighed heavily. "The next morning I begged her to forget the bet. I even offered to tell you everything before the ceremony." "What happened?" She looked me in the eyes and said, "If Ethan knows now, he'll never trust me enough to marry me." I closed my eyes. "So I stayed silent," Daniel whispered. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. For years I had blamed Claire alone. Now I realized another person had chosen silence. Not out of malice, but out of fear." Daniel continued. "Rachel arrived before the ceremony. That caught my attention. She was there." "Yes. I don't remember seeing her." "You wouldn't. She stayed in another room." He handed me another photograph. Rachel stood beside Claire in her wedding dress. Claire wasn't smiling. She looked terrified. 5 minutes before the ceremony, Daniel said, Rachel told Claire she still had time to cancel everything. "Then why didn't she?" Because Rachel added one sentence. He swallowed hard. If you tell Ethan now, he'll think every promise you've ever made is a lie. The words echoed painfully. Claire had made the wrong choice. But it was a choice driven by fear, not cruelty. That didn't excuse it, it simply made it more tragic. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. I should have stopped the wedding. You couldn't make that decision for us. No, he admitted, but I could have told you the truth. I nodded slowly. You could have. When I returned home that evening, Claire was sitting on the porch. She looked exhausted. I met Daniel, I said. She closed her eyes. I wondered when you would. He showed me your letter. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I wrote 3 different goodbye letters that night. What changed? You. She looked directly at me. When I saw you waiting at the end of the aisle, smiling at me. I convinced myself I could fix everything after the wedding. She laughed bitterly. I kept telling myself I'd confess after the honeymoon. Then after our first anniversary. Then after our first child was born. And then 10 years passed. She nodded. I'm so sorry. I sat beside her. For the first time since all this began, we talked for hours. Not about blame, not about the bet, about everything we had never said aloud. She admitted every lie. I admitted every moment I had felt lonely without telling her. We talked until sunrise. When the sun finally appeared, I realized something important. Trust doesn't return because someone apologizes. It returns only when truth replaces secrecy, day after day, choice after choice. Claire understood that too. I know we're not okay, she said quietly. No, I know you may never trust me the way you once did. I don't, she nodded, but if there's even the smallest chance, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. I looked toward the rising sun. For the first time since discovering the diary, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, hope. Just as we stood to go inside, a car pulled into our driveway. Rachel stepped out. She wasn't alone. A lawyer walked beside her, carrying a folder. Rachel looked at both of us and said, I'm here to make things right, even if it means losing everything I own. The folder in the lawyer's hands contained documents that neither Claire nor I had ever seen before. And according to Rachel, they would change all of our lives forever. Rachel stood at the edge of our driveway, looking older than she had just a few days earlier. The confident woman who had once believed every marriage was destined to fail was gone. In her place stood someone carrying the weight of 10 years of regret. The lawyer introduced himself and placed a thick folder on our dining room table. I represent Ms. Rachel Morgan, he said. She's asked me to witness the signing of several legal documents. Claire looked confused. What documents? Rachel took a deep breath. I've spent years trying to justify what I did. There isn't any justification. She opened the folder. Inside were notarized statements describing the bet in detail, how it had started, how she had encouraged Claire to create tests, and how she had repeatedly pressured her not to confess. Every page bore Rachel's signature. I've accepted full responsibility for my actions, Rachel said. If either of you chooses to take legal action, I won't contest the facts. I looked at the papers without speaking. Rachel continued. The second document transfers the $50,000 from the original wager into an educational trust for your children. Claire shook her head. We don't want your money. I know, Rachel replied. This isn't payment. Nothing can pay for what I did. It's simply the only meaningful thing I can do now. The lawyer slid another document toward me. It was a public apology. Rachel had written it herself. She intended to send it to everyone who had unknowingly been drawn into the deception over the years, including Daniel. I lied to protect my pride, she admitted. In doing so, I damaged people who had done nothing to deserve it. Silence filled the room. Finally, I asked the question that had stayed with me from the beginning. Why come here now? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Because I watched the two of you choose honesty after everything that happened. I realized I'd spent 10 years running from the truth. Claire looked at her quietly. I forgave you a long time ago, she said. I just never forgave myself. Rachel lowered her head. You shouldn't have carried that burden alone. No, Claire answered. But I chose to. The lawyer collected the signed papers and left us alone. Rachel stood to leave as well. Before reaching the door, she turned back. I don't expect forgiveness from either of you. I nodded. You may never receive it. I understand. But I hope, I continued, that you stop letting your own pain define how you see other people's lives. Rachel managed a faint smile. I already have. She walked away without looking back. For the first time in 10 years, the story that had begun with a reckless bet finally had an ending. But our marriage didn't. That evening, Claire and I sat on the back porch after the children had gone to bed. The silence between us no longer felt hostile. It simply felt honest. "I've been thinking," I said. She waited. "I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was." "It shouldn't," she replied. "No, I broke that version of our marriage." I looked at her. "If we stay together, it won't be because we ignore the past." She nodded. "It will be because we build something new." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'd like that." For the first time in weeks, I reached across the table and took her hand. Not as a declaration that everything was fixed. Not as forgiveness. Just as a sign that I was willing to keep talking. She squeezed my hand gently, careful not to mistake hope for certainty. As we sat together watching the sunset, our daughter opened the back door. "Mom, Dad," we turned. She smiled. "Movie night." Claire looked at me. For the first time since discovering the diary, I smiled back. Movie night. We stood together and walked inside. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was no longer built on secrets. The months that followed were nothing like the years before. There were no dramatic arguments, no hidden letters, no secret meetings. Instead, there was something far more difficult: honesty. Claire and I continued meeting with our counselor every week. Some sessions ended with hope. Others ended in silence. One afternoon, the counselor asked us a simple question. "If you had to describe your marriage in one word today, what would it be?" Claire answered first. "Fragile." Then she looked at me. I thought for a long moment. Honest. It wasn't a perfect marriage. But for the first time, it was a truthful one. Claire had changed in ways I couldn't ignore. She shared every financial statement with me. She never hid a phone call. If she made a mistake, even a small one, she admitted it immediately instead of covering it with another lie. She understood that trust wasn't restored through grand gestures. It was rebuilt through hundreds of ordinary choices. Our children noticed the difference. The tension that had once filled the house slowly disappeared. Laughter returned to family dinners. Weekend trips became a tradition again, not because we were pretending everything was fine, but because we were learning to enjoy each other's company without fear. One Saturday, while cleaning the garage, I found the old toolbox where I'd hidden Claire's diary. I carried it into the backyard. Claire walked outside. She immediately recognized it. "You kept it." I wasn't sure why. She looked at the box quietly. "What are you going to do with it?" I opened it. The diary was still there. So were the letters, the photographs, Rachel's confession, every painful reminder of the life we'd nearly destroyed. I held the diary for a long time. "This book changed everything." Claire nodded. "It did. It exposed the worst part of our marriage." Another nod. "But it also forced us to become the people we should have been from the beginning." She wiped away a tear. "I wish it hadn't taken so much pain." "So do I." Without another word, I carried the diary to the fire pit in the backyard. Claire understood what I was doing. She didn't stop me. I placed the diary on the wood. Then the letters she'd never sent. Finally, copies of Rachel's confession that we no longer needed because the originals were safely stored with our counselor. I struck a match. For a moment, I hesitated. Those pages contained years of lies. But they also contained years of regret. I dropped the match. The flames slowly spread. Claire stood beside me, silently crying as the diary curled into ash. Neither of us celebrated. Some memories should never be celebrated. They should simply be released. When the fire died down, only gray ashes remained. Claire slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm not thanking you for what happened. I know. I'm thanking you for telling the truth when it finally mattered." She nodded. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it always matters." That evening, Daniel came over for dinner. Before leaving, he pulled me aside. "I owe you something. You already apologized." "Not enough." He handed me a small wooden frame. Inside was our wedding photo. But it wasn't the one that had hung over our fireplace. This picture had been taken a few seconds later. In the original, Claire had been smiling at the camera. In this one, she wasn't looking at the photographer. She was looking directly at me. Despite everything we had learned, the love in her eyes was unmistakable. Daniel smiled sadly. "I took that picture. I've never seen it. I couldn't bear to look at it after I kept her secret." I stared at the photograph. For years, I'd believed our wedding day had been built entirely on deception. Now I realized something more complicated. It had been built on love. And one terrible decision that almost destroyed it. Later that night, Claire found me looking at the framed picture. "I remember that moment," she said softly. What were you thinking? She smiled through tears. I was thinking I'd never met anyone who deserved the truth more than you. I looked at her. So why didn't you tell me? She closed her eyes. Because I confused fear with love. Neither of us spoke again. Some questions had answers. Some answers could never erase the past. But they could help us build a different future. As we turned off the lights and headed upstairs, the house felt peaceful. Not because our problems had disappeared, but because there were no more secrets left hiding beneath the floorboards. Only one chapter remained to be written, the chapter that would decide whether forgiveness could truly become the foundation of a new beginning.